Welcome to our webinar. Our guest speaker today is Andrew Laflin, CPA. He is the president and CEO of Aclarian LLC. Andrew has spent 17 years in public accounting and was a former audit partner for a national firm. He formed his own company, Aclarian LLC, which provides outsourcing, consulting, and technology services. His company provides customized ERP solutions for various industries. Andrew is going to present to us today on key strategies in ERP systems that can drive efficiency and effectiveness for both financial reporting and business operations. And now I'm going to pass this off to our wonderful speaker, Andrew.
Great, thanks, Christine. Appreciate that introduction. Let's dive right in. So what we're going to do today is talk through some efficiency considerations in multiple areas. So for those that are in attendance, you might be a part of a small company, larger company, somewhere in between. If you're, every entity, regardless of size, always has some area of business process improvement that could be implemented, and technology is a typical culprit. And some of it might just be software limitations. Some of it might be where the software has the capability. It's just a matter of configuring properly. Or it might be a matter of, well, we need an actual system upgrade because we've outgrown our current system. So what I want to present here today is just some things that I've seen over the years in consulting with various entities, and then things through in my own company where we've built our technology platform to make sure that we've addressed these, what I call typical concerns and considerations in various business processes. And so we'll talk through purchasing, HR and payroll, inventory, fixed assets, revenue collection and budgeting, talk through a couple reporting considerations, and then end it on just some key takeaways and address any questions you all have. So first, in the area of purchasing, so what are just some indications of an inefficient purchasing process? A lot of what I see is just really a lack of understanding on what to do in what situation. So does your entity have an actual purchasing policy? Does it have a procedural manual? If it does, is it well followed? Does everybody know what it is? What is the approval process for approving invoices, for initiating a purchase? Do I need to get pre-approval authority? Do I need to get a purchase order? In what situations can I use a credit card? In what situations do I need to have a purchase order? When should I get 3 quotes? All these kinds of questions are, are the answers to those well documented? And is everyone in the organization that's involved at some level on purchasing have a clear understanding of the answers to those questions? So that's a big piece. And then the next on just the requisitioning and invoice approval process, does it look something like this, where invoices come in, they get printed, they get passed around, they get signed off on? You've got a purchase requisition manual form. So how manual is this process? And this is one thing where I see huge time savings when there is use of electronic workflow to initiate and complete approvals, both on the requisitioning side when we're getting that pre-approval authority, as well as when the vendor provides goods or services and it's time to approve that invoice and get that vendor paid. And so maybe it's not a manual process, but it's email, which is to me almost as bad. Trying to manage tasks through Outlook, at least in my own personal opinion, is very challenging because we get emails, flooded with emails all day, every day on all sorts of matters. And I've seen some very creative Outlook inboxes and moving items to various folders and trying to keep it as organized as possible. But there are better ways to manage tasks beyond Outlook if it's possible, especially in the area of purchasing where you need to make approvals. To me, Outlook is not the best place for that. And then on credit cards, so again, we talked about when is it appropriate to initiate a purchase via credit card. What are the limits? When should something not be purchased via credit card? And then also the tracking of those expenses, the reporting of those expenses. Do we just turn in our receipts and someone then has to then enter those into the system, and not only the amount but also the GL coding for those? Is the GL coding written on the receipt? Information about the transaction, and then it's got to get entered in again in the system, which is double entry, and we'll talk about the inefficiencies around double entry. So what is your how do you utilize your credit cards, and is it in the most efficient way? So characteristics of an efficient, highly functioning purchasing process. So again, we talked about understanding the purchasing requirements. So have a robust procedural document, clear, concise requirements. It's well understood. There's clarity surrounding any exceptions to any process where you might, in normal circumstances, need to get more than one quote. Make sure it's all very well laid out. And then also that there's adequate training across departments. If you're a small company, there's only 2 or 3 of you involved in the whole process, well, then maybe this isn't as necessary. But for certainly larger companies, this is especially important, just from not only an efficiency standpoint, but also a matter of strengthened, stronger internal controls. And then we talked about manual-driven processes around purchasing approvals, either at the requisition level or at the invoice level when we receive invoices from vendors. Can we streamline that better to utilize workflows, dashboards, to both include the document, capturing that document, retaining it, as well as notifying a user when it's time to make an approval, and leveraging technology to do that. And then just some examples here of where we can leverage technology would be, for example, a vendor invoicing portal. So telling all vendors to submit their invoices to a particular portal. So that way we know it doesn't get missed. So they're not having to mail us the invoice, then we have to open the mail, then we got a piece of paper that we got to do something with, and we've got to scan it, send it somewhere. Having a centralized repository to capture all those invoices from vendors definitely enhances efficiency. And then things like auto pay capability. Instead of having to generate checks from the system and print checks and mail checks and go through your quote unquote Friday AP run, have an auto pay capability where the system can capture that invoice through an electronic form and then submit that plus the vendor information to a third party that can process that payment either via check or ACH on your behalf. So time savings there. And then also being able to strongly recommended to utilize positive pay if you don't with your bank, especially if you have a large volume of check transactions. So being able to send that positive pay file to your bank in a more automated, streamlined fashion, so where there can be a nightly file interface between your system and the bank that can dictate, here are the check numbers, here's the vendor names, here's the check amounts, check dates, and here's what we approve for payment. So being able to automate that as much as possible definitely enhances efficiency efforts around surrounding purchasing. And this is just something that with our technology platform that we have around purchasing that shows a dashboard that shows for each of these different types, whether it's an invoice approval, credit card approval, once something is routed to me, then these zeros, this 0 would turn to a 1. I can get an email notification, but I can also log in, see my dashboard, and see what's awaiting my approval, that I don't have to get a phone call or multiple emails, or something that's put on my desk. If it's manually routed, I have a one-stop shop where I can go in and see, here are all the approvals I need to make. So having a system that has that dashboard capability definitely makes it helpful to track what's on your plate in terms of what you need to approve surrounding purchasing. And having your system be able to customize things according to your procedural manual. So being able to, for example, in this form, drop in the general ledger account that is associated with this, and have a procurement method. So, hey, this procurement method, if it's between 1,000 and 15,000, for example, I need to get 3 written quotes. That's what my procedural document says. So we can custom build this purchase requisition form in order to do that. So be able to have a system that can cater to what your purchasing requirements are is definitely an advantage. And then I mentioned an invoicing portal. So have some kind of portal, or there's also OCR capabilities, which again, depending on the volume of transactions, could be something worth looking at, where you can scan something. You get either an email, and it can go to send it to an email address. So AP or purchasing at abccompany.com, and from there the OCR software can read it and then prepare the invoice and route it to the appropriate party based on the information that's on the invoice, and helps, again, streamline that process faster and be able to read information off an invoice and get it entered in the system automatically. And then vendor invoicing portal is also something we can have the vendor enter all this information, include then the attachment, browse files, attach the invoice, and then submit. And that also can then be a direct link into the system. So the system automatically captures that information and limits the amount of data entry that's put in. So next, talking about payroll, what does your payroll process look like? Do you use manual timesheets? So what is some of the drawbacks of manual timesheets if you all have timesheets that are completed? So again, there's the accumulation effort. So people fill them out, and then they got to go submit them somehow or some way. There's always going to be double entry because you're entering the information in the timesheet, then you got to enter in the information in your payroll system. That creates accuracy risk. So from entering the information in the timesheet and then having to enter it again into the system, could there have been something that got miskeyed? So there's that accuracy risk and other risk factors as well. So having only one place to enter time always creates a more efficient payroll processing environment. So it extends not only to manual timesheets, but also vacation requests, other payroll HR forms, same issues as I mentioned here. Manual vacation request form or an email, hey, I want to take these days off, okay, approved, and then that's got to get in the payroll system, versus if we could just do it into your payroll HRIS system, and then again routed for approval, much easier. So it's done once, and then you don't have to think about it again, enter it again, and you have a vacation leave bank tracking system as well in your payroll HR system that employees can manage. So again, just some things that have really been eye-opening to me is sometimes the hours that are spent actually just processing payroll for those entities that do it internally. Spend almost an entire week effort, a couple days for just one employee to do it. If that's the case, outsourcing might need to be a strong consideration, or at least figuring a way to simplify that better. there's not only the time, but also the compliance risks associated with it, and getting the 941s out on time, unemployment taxes, making all the required regulatory filings, both the state and the federal level, and potentially even the local level. All those that entities, that payroll processing entities that specialize this can do more effectively and efficiently. And then another big thing is benefit elections, and how are those entered? So benefit election changes, initial elections, all that obviously impacts an employee's pay. And so how many times do we have to enter that? And so do we have a portal where the employee can enter that information? But then when that information is made, then we got to go and enter into the payroll system so the appropriate deduction can be made. Boy, wouldn't that be nice to have that all in a one-stop shop? So having a complete HRIS payroll system where they can go into that one system, make their election, make election changes, all that's captured in one spot, and then feeds the rest of that data, that informational changes flows throughout the payroll cycle. And then what do personnel files look like? So it's great when we have a employee self-service option, so where an employee can go and look up all information that relates to their employment. So their own I-9, they can access their own W-2s, they can access their pay stubs at any given moment, year-to-date pay, have reporting available for themselves. That way they're not having to ask the payroll manager for that information. So that's a strong benefit of having everything just nicely in one place. And again, the more things that are scattered around in manually in physical locations, the harder it is to accumulate and keep track of. So characteristics of an efficient, highly functioning HR and payroll process. So again, what I mentioned, a fully integrated system that combines, payroll, benefits, even an applicant tracking system where it's all there in one spot. So, from an application stage to a new hire to a current employee to termination, it all can get done in one system. Include performance management, time clocks, everything. So have all that available to you, again, in a one-stop shop. And again, this will eliminate the redundancies by enabling consolidation of all that data into that single system of record. We talked about employee self-service so that they can access all this information on their own and not have to bother specific employees in the payroll HR department for that info when they've got it. And then even supervisors have a place that they can review approved timesheets, manage time off, track training, provide performance feedback, all those sorts of things, be able to do that in one location as well. So keep it as centralized as possible. Next item to talk about inventory management. Especially if we have some manufacturer, retail clients, or entities that are in attendance here. Characteristics of an inefficient inventory management program. Well, when it's time to do inventory, what does that look like? Are we having to physically count things? That's essentially the distinction between the perpetual and periodic inventory system. If you don't have much and it's not a big deal, no sense in acquiring more expensive software to be able to do it perpetually. But if you do, it could definitely be worth the investment. So on a periodic system, we're performing inventories, physically counting things, and then matching that against what we have in our inventory system, and making adjustments as needed on a periodic basis. Hence, periodic inventory system, right? So if we're doing that monthly, annually, semi-annually, quarterly, whatever the desired frequency is, okay if there's just not that many assets or inventory items that we need to track. But if it's more voluminous, probably makes a lot more sense to have a more sophisticated method that can capture all this stuff on a perpetual basis. So an example here is through RFID, where these items might have small tags, and then the RFID tags affixed to the item. the antenna reads it all and then feeds that back into the application that tracks it as located or not located and provides real-time reporting back to you on what's located and what's not. And then all your efforts in that regard are on analyzing exceptions and not having to actually perform the actual counts. And then on the cost accounting system, so what's the complexity associated with calculating cost per unit? And so what are all those inputs into the process from raw materials to work in process that eventually gets to the finished good? And how efficient is that, and how much effort is there required to enter those inputs? So if there's labor involved, do we have certain WIP labor codes that we've entered into for these employees that can denote what they're working on when, that can then get entered into automatically through the payroll feed from payroll through to cost accounting. So we're not having to go back and evaluate labor time to try to associate with a particular product or unit. And then same thing on the materials from purchases, from the time it's purchased, is it coded in such a way that it automatically updates the cost accounting system so that we have an accurate cost per unit, which is very important in knowing, for multiple reasons, cost and profitability of what that true cost per unit is, and the most efficient way to capture what those per unit costs are, and avoiding as much manual intervention as possible. So inventory management, we talked about what characteristics of an efficient, highly functioning asset and inventory management system is. So we talked about general ledger integration, asset additions, disposals, and transfers, similar to what we talked about on purchasing, use of workflow and dashboard. So if you've got fixed assets and you've got to dispose of one, what's the process to do so? Do you get notified through the system that, hey, there's been an approval that comes to you for the disposal of a piece of equipment? Again, if it only happens a few times a year and there's not much, maybe an email and a spreadsheet's no big deal. But depending on frequency, again, you might want to have a more robust technology solution to be able to capture that through workflows and dashboards. And then we talked about asset tracking subject to inventory, using tags, GPS, BLE, or RFID, which can broadcast the location. I think to the left here, I've got, GPS on this. So if you've got, if your inventory is more, bobcats or tractors, or certain vehicles, well, then maybe a GPS system makes the most sense. Might be a little more expensive to affix a GPS device to each vehicle, but could be well worth their weight in gold, depending on the size and the value of each inventory item. And then we talked about having an efficient cost accounting system that's really customized based on your specifications and contains automated features, because not every cost accounting system really should look or feel or act the same. It really depends on what what you want it to look like, and what all those, we talked about, those necessary inputs are, how to capture them, and how to update the per unit cost efficiently. So really being able to have a system that can accommodate your needs and your specifications while also introducing sufficient automation around it is what's truly important. So then revenue collection. So just an example here, let's say you sell fence materials. Well, how does somebody order them? Do you have a physical order form that they can maybe access online and print out and then have to go and mail or fax in? Well, those days should really be over. I mean, you should be able to have the ability to provide that online capability to accept orders, and then when you do accept those orders and bill for them, what does that look like on a bank reconciliation? So a lot of what I see is, especially when you've got multiple recurring customer orders and payments via credit card, being able to track those on the bank, and those can be quite a headache if you don't have one-for-one transactions when you're trying to reconcile cash per general ledger to cash per bank. When orders are coming in and the way it's getting into the system does not match the way those amounts are getting entered into the bank. And so that's just a configuration problem, and we've got to make sure we configure that correctly so we can get those one-for-one matches. So we talk here on these characteristics: an online application, registration, payment options. The more you can present, online web applications to be able to track new customers, get new customers registered, allow them to make orders, make payments. The more things they can do on their own without your necessary involvement, the more efficient it's going to be for you, and probably the more the customer will like it, because they like to be self-sufficient and be able to just do things on their own. And then we talked about the efficient reconciliation process between general ledger and bank statement for all transaction types: cash, check, credit card. So as these payments come in, we've got an efficient way to compare them from what's hitting the general ledger system to what's being actually posted on the bank. And like we said, having those easy one-for-one matches so it does not make bank reconciliation process difficult. And then just on the budgeting process, depending on how, again, sophisticated you are and how detailed you want to have your budgeting, some of it's done on spreadsheets, and that's perfectly acceptable depending on, again, size and complexity of your organization, but to where there is some level of complexity where a spreadsheet may not be the best option. We've got problems, if multiple individuals need to access a moving budget document, then you're having version control issues in the spreadsheet and who has it checked out and who can do what. That presents a problem. Changes after something's been quote unquote approved, and then is the spreadsheet locked down, or is it still an editable document getting updated? That's can also be problematic. So there can be some definite issues when you rely on spreadsheets to complete a business process start to finish, and I've especially seen that with some entities I've worked with on budgeting. So we talked about excessive use of spreadsheets and what can happen, version control issues, double entries. So if you're entering budgetary information into your system, well, it gets on the spreadsheet first, then you got to enter it in the system. And again, we don't like double entry. Some upfront effort to pre-populate spreadsheet templates. So here's the prior year's amounts. Here's prior year budgets amounts. All that's got to get maybe pre-populated before we start sending the spreadsheet out to department heads to start budgeting for their departmental costs for next year, because they want to see have some historical basis before they make those inputs. And again, not much in the way of reporting capabilities with just the spreadsheets. But if you have an advanced budgeting solution within your ERP system, if you have a budgeting module in your ERP system, I've seen some of these where it requires significant training. There's no customization options. This is all you get, and you've got to try to fit within that narrow space. Not much in the way of scenario analysis, and again, there could be limited reporting capabilities. But if you have what does an efficient and highly functioning budgeting process look like? Again, first understand budgetary control and how much a department can spend. Can it overspend on a line item, but as long as it doesn't overspend by its the total amount per department? So what are the controls that your entity has in place, and make sure everyone knows, okay, these are the limitations, and this is what's acceptable. So make sure there's a clear understanding around that on a conceptual basis. Again, love the idea of workflows and dashboards. So we need to make amendments, make budgetary entries. Departments can do that. Customized budget configurations that enables for scenario analysis. I'll give you some examples of that, I think, in the next slide. And then good reporting capabilities, charts, graphs, tables that we can enter into. If you create some kind of budget document, you can pull that information from the system and send into a document and send to owners, other stakeholders, and into your company that presents them with good information. So things like dashboard reporting here, this will show for this department, this is what the what my line items look like and where I've spent to date. Up to 14% of, or salaries and wages is 24% of the total that I've budgeted, and have that available on your dashboard, and it's updated real time with information that's entered into the general ledger. And maybe 24% is a good thing because you're 25 or so percent throughout the year, or maybe it's a bad thing because you're barely 10 days into your year. So why are we already incurring 26% on software support when we weren't expecting it? So this just gives you an accurate depiction of where you stand in relation to your budget on a real-time basis. So that's just an example of dashboard reporting that might be of value to any user. And so this can and should be able to vary, but depending on what's important to you. So you want to know information on a cost per unit based on a product, because that's constantly changing, but you want to just have reporting that's in front of you, that's available on your dashboard. So having technology available that can adapt to what your requirements are as far as what reporting is valuable to you and what you want to see, whether it's in a chart, a graph, or a report that you can just click a button to export, and in real time it spits out in Excel exactly the information you're wanting or looking for. These are just some examples of things you might be interested in. So revenue results by region, you want to know what that is and just have that without having to click a bunch of buttons and filter and format things. You can just have that at your fingertips in either a chart or graph. Same thing, inventory balances by location, budget actual comparison by department. That's what you see here just as an example. So having useful reporting available on a dashboard within your system, obviously a big plus. Some key takeaways, what's next? You might have reasons to take no action. You're a small company, you use QuickBooks, and it does the bare minimum, but does exactly what you need it to do, and you really don't need anything else at this point. Some of these things I talked about maybe could have some value, and maybe not today, but down the road, because you only have 6 employees, so you can pretty well manage that through your current payroll system, but you might eventually have 60 or 600, and then we might need to start considering some greater efficiencies around a full integrated HRS. The more your needs, then the potentially more expensive it is to find that right system that can do everything that you're looking for. And it might be too time consuming. This is not an overnight process to make a business process change that involves the use of technology that can be time consuming to not only implement, but also train on those business processes, on those changes. So as I show in the picture here, the juice just might not be worth the squeeze. But if taking action does make sense, then let's follow these 3 simple approaches. Develop a plan, set a timeline with the action items and deliverables, and then go out there and execute. And it could be on one or multiple things. It could be a whole system conversion. It could just be adding a piece to something that you already have that makes it better. Not every situation is the same for every company, so it really just depends on what your needs and desires are, and making sure you find whatever's out there that that can get you what you're looking for.